All right. So in the last lecture, we were exploring this connection between sampling and counting. Right? So in we looked at the special case of independent sets. Even though we said that whatever techniques and theory that we are developing, it is applicable to a large class of problems which are self-reducible. Right. And in particular for independent sets, we saw that if you can actually um, if you have an algorithm that can sample independent sets almost uniformly, then you can use that sampler to actually construct a FPRAS, an approximation algorithm to count the number of independent sets. Right. So today, what we will see first is that this connection goes the other way as well. Right. Which is that um, just a minute. Uh, which is that if you have a randomized algorithm, an FPRAS, then you can use that to construct a sampler as well. So that's the first thing that we will see today. Right. So this is the statement that an almost uniform sampler implies a randomized approximation scheme. Right. And again, we will look in the special case of independent sets. Okay. Any questions so far regarding last lecture or anything that is unclear? Okay. All right. So let's see how we go from. Uh, um, oh, sorry. This is what we did actually. We're going the other way. Sorry. We have a randomized approximation scheme, and we want to construct a sampler. Right? We know how to count the number of independent sets, and you want to construct an algorithm that will sample an independent set uniformly at random. Right. So the first thing that we will actually show is that exact counting implies uniform sampling. Okay. So if you could count exactly, right? If you can count the number of independent sets exactly, then you can generate a uniform sample using that algorithm. Right? We are going to extend this idea, modify it slightly to show that if you have a randomized approximation scheme, then you have an almost uniform sampler rather than getting a uniform sampler. Okay. The idea, the basic idea is going to come from this algorithm, and then we'll just modify it suitably, right? And this algorithm is not very difficult to see. It's going to use the self reducibility of independent set. We're going to use the self reducibility of independent sets. Okay. So recall that the self reducibility was the for independent set, the self reducibility was the following, which is that take any vertex, either that vertex is in the independent set or it's not. If it is in the independent set, then you can remove that vertex together with its neighbors and then construct an independent set on the remaining graph. Right. So given G and the vertex V, right, I can construct two graphs. One is G1, which is basically G minus V minus neighborhood of V, and G2, which is G minus V. Okay. The reason, and then what you can say is that the number of independent sets of G1, this counts the number of independent sets in G that contain V, right? And the number of independent sets in G2 is counts the number of independent sets in G that does not contain V. Right? This is the self-reducibility property of independent sets. If you take any vertex, either it is in the independent set or it's out. If it is in the independent set, remove that vertex together with its neighbors and find the independent set in the remaining graph. Right. So omega g1, cardinality of omega g1 is the number of independent sets that in G that contain V. Right. And therefore, the number of independent sets in G is just the sum of these two. Okay. So now our goal is to sample an independent set uniformly at random from this set here. Right. What you're going to do is for each vertex, we're going to decide whether or not to put it in the independent set. Right. And the decision is it's a probabilistic decision. We base it on some value. So how do we sample actually, right? So now let's see how we will construct the independent set or sampling an independent set. Okay, assume that there is some ordering of vertices, say v1, v2, and vn. Okay, there is some ordering, and we will go according to this ordering. Okay, so let v be some vertex in this order. Okay, now what you do is you add v to the independent set I with probability cardinality omega g1 by cardinality omega g. Okay, and therefore with probability 1 minus this, right? 1 minus g1 by omega g1 g. You don't add it. With this is same as cardinality omega g2 by cardinality omega g. Okay, and we can do this mainly because you can do exact counting, right? We assume that we can do exact counting now, right? So if you could do exact counting, then I can calculate these sizes, and then for each vertex I choose to put it in the independent set proportional to the number of independent sets in the graph, in that corresponding graph, right? So g1 omega g1 counts the number of independent sets which contain v. So you add v to I with that probability, right? And you keep doing this. So once you do this, you get a graph g1. Now it is possible that you start with the vertex v1, and say you put v1 in I. Then it's possible that v2, v3 have been deleted from the graph. Then you don't consider them and you go to the next vertex, right? And you keep doing this, and for every vertex that is available until all the vertices are exhausted, right? At the end of this process, what you have is definitely an independent set, right? All you want to show is that this is independent set is sampled uniformly at random from the set of all independent sets. Is the algorithm clear? Right? So at every step, we use the counting algorithm to find omega g, cardinality omega g1, cardinality omega g, cardinality omega g2, and then we sample according to this probability. And based on this probability, we either add that vertex into the independent set or just leave it outside. Correct? Is this clear? Any questions regarding this algorithm? Yeah. So the only thing that you want to show is that this indeed gives you a uniformly random independent set, right? And if you notice this, that is not very hard to see also, right? So what do you want to show? You want to show that given an independent set I, the probability that I is sampled is 1 over cardinality of omega g, right? This is what you want to show. This is what it means to say that this sampling, right, whatever you have done here, generates an independent set uniformly at random, right? So you do this you're doing this iteratively for every vertex, but you might not have to do it for all the vertices in the graph, because if you add a vertex into the independent set, you will remove all its neighbors. Right? So you do this for at most n steps, at the end of which you have an independent set, and you want to show that the probability that your sampling algorithm comes up with this independent set is 1 over cardinality omega g. Right? And this is also not very difficult to see. Can someone tell me why this is why this would be the case? Do you see this? The reason is that you're going to have this sort of a product where you'll keep canceling off terms, right? So, for instance, the first, let's look at the case, say that V1 is present in I, right? So, so what is the probability that I is sampled? This is the probability that, say, I is the set some V1, V2 up till Vr, right? So, then the probability that I is sampled is nothing but the probability that V1 is sampled. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Right. Given V, then the remaining graph is G1 and that will come into the denominator. Right. That's what is going to happen. Right. So when you want to say probability that I is sampled, what is that? So you want to say that V1 is getting sampled. So the probability of V1 getting sampled is say omega G1 divided by cardinality omega G. Right. Now the next step, we are going to look at the graph G1. Okay. It is possible that between V1 and V2, there are other vertices. That maybe there is a vertex V here, and our sampling algorithm just didn't consider that in that series, right? And but the probability that V was not included in the um, independent set is just omega G2 prime, say, and divided by omega G1, right? Because your graph is now G1, right? If you add V1 into the independent set, then your graph is basically G1 because you have removed V together with its neighbors. And now you're saying that what is the probability that the next vertex, another vertex in this graph is not present in the independent set? Then you have the corresponding omega G2 prime and so on. So the next denominator will have omega G2 prime, right? You keep doing this until what you have here will be the empty graph, right? And therefore what will happen is that you all these terms will just go off, right? Okay. So if you could actually count these numbers, the number of independent sets exactly, then this sampling process will give you the sample exactly, right? You will get a uniform sample if you can count exactly, correct? It uses it. It's because of the self-reducibility property also, right? So now the question is, what happens if you don't have an exact counting algorithm, right? What happens when you have an FP-RAS? Okay, the idea is to just extend the same thing. We are going to use a similar idea, just that we will replace these quantities, right? These quantities we'll have to replace accordingly. Okay, so let's see what how we will do that. So now what we have is you're looking at an FP-RAS. What we have is an FP-RAS for counting. Okay. So now what is it that you want to do? So you take a vertex P in the graph. Okay. Now again you have the graph G1, which is G minus V minus neighborhood of V, and G2 is G minus V, right? Notice that now you can't compute cardinality omega G1 anymore, right? That is, we can't do this anymore. So what you can actually do is you can run your FP-RAS, right? You can get a number N1, which is obtained by running the FP-RAS on G1, and you can get a number N2 if you run the FP-RAS A on G2, right? These are the two things that you will get. So what is the most obvious thing to do now? What is the most obvious sampling that you will do? Yeah, you use this count, right? So what you will say is add V to the independent is at I with probability n1 divided by n1 plus n2. Correct? And you do this at every step. Correct? So so this is with n1 divided by n1 plus n2, and with n2 divided by n1 plus n2, you don't add V into your independent set. Okay. Once again, after this process ended, what you have is definitely an independent set. The only question is this what can you say about the distribution over the set of independent sets? Right? Any questions so far? Is this clear? Okay. So the question that so the thing that we want to ask is fix given an independent set I, what is the probability that I is sampled? Right? And how is it related? What you want to what you want is how is it related to the cardinality of the set of independent sets? Right? This is what you want to understand. Right? So what can you say? What can you say in this scenario? Right? What you know is that this is an FP-RAS. Right? What does that mean? What it means is that N1 is at most 1 plus epsilon cardinality omega G1 and at least 1 minus epsilon cardinality omega G1. Right? This is what it means to say that A is an FP-RAS. Okay. So in particular, if you look at this quantity, right, what you can say is that N1 by N1 plus N2 is at most 1 plus epsilon divided by 1 minus epsilon cardinality omega G1 by cardinality omega G. Right? And similarly on the other side as well. Right? It will be at least 1 minus epsilon divided by 1 plus epsilon omega G1 by omega G. Right? So for a moment, assume that this is not a randomized approximation scheme. Let's forget about the randomization for now. But suppose that you get this guarantee, right? It's always the case that this happens. Let's forget about the small error probability that can happen when you don't get when the estimate does not lie in this range. Let's forget about that for a moment. Okay. So suppose you had this guarantee. Okay. Then what can you say about the probability of I being sampled? Okay, so that's what we want to know, right? So what is the probability that I is sampled? What can you say? What is the sort of bound that you will get? I mean, can you give an upper bound and lower bound? What you can say is that you will get something like 1 plus epsilon by 1 minus epsilon to the n times 1 over omega g. And similarly, you'll have something like 1 minus epsilon by 1 plus epsilon to the n. Right, again, you'll have that you'll have the similar sort of uh, sequence, right, of these multiplications where you get cancellations, and this is something that you'll get. So this you can say, so for instance, this you can say is, so this probability, you can say something like at most 1 plus, say, 3 epsilon to the n by omega g, and this is okay, or some such value. I mean, you can get 3 or some constant that will be there. Does this is this sufficient for a almost uniform sampler?
So, how did you get 1 plus 3?
I mean, it's just, for instance, I can always say that 1 plus epsilon by 1 minus epsilon is less than 1 plus 3 epsilon, right? For certain for values of, right? I mean, you can just multiply it and see. It's just for a large enough constant, it will be some function of epsilon, some c epsilon, 3 or 4, it will work. Right? You can just multiply it out and see, right? Does that make sense, Shrikant?
Yeah, okay.
Yeah. But is this sufficient for an almost uniform sampler?
No, right?
Why is this not sufficient?
Uh, I actually I still am confused how you made it 1 plus 3, because epsilon is small enough. 1 plus epsilon by 1 minus epsilon could be like uh,
It can only be slightly larger than 1, probably, right? I mean, that's the idea. If epsilon is small enough, it's
oh,
slightly larger than 1. So depending on epsilon, you can choose that constant, basically. Right. But it is some in. I don't want to. Maybe if I don't, if you're very not very comfortable with 3, put some epsilon prime. It will be some epsilon prime, some constant epsilon prime that depends on epsilon. If you want to say that way, if you want it.
okay. Still, you won't get 1 plus k epsilon. Right? You want something like that. Like, how will you remove the exponent?
Yeah, so you could choose epsilon prime, right? You can choose. Suppose I choose epsilon prime, epsilon to be, for instance, I choose epsilon to be, say, 1 over n squared. Right, this is in my hand. This is coming from the FPRS. Right,
Oh,
this is
okay.
in my hand. Okay, so right, so I can always choose epsilon to be small enough so that this is not large, right? The only problem with this is that because of the way in which an FP, the almost uniform sampler, is defined, this is basically giving you um, the running time is polynomial in n and log 1 over epsilon, when you want to make sure that this distance between probability, that if you look at the definition, W in S minus cardinality S over cardinality omega, if you want this to be less than epsilon, you want the running time to be polynomial in log 1 over epsilon. Okay, so that's what is an almost uniform sampler. So if you choose epsilon this way, it's not going to work very well. Okay, so this is it's not an almost uniform sampler. It is it will be a sampler where the running time is a polynomial in n 1 over epsilon. Okay, right? If you just want to do that, it's always you can just repeat this and get such a sampler. What the next idea is what is sometimes known as rejection sampling. So to get this bound that you want, use what is known as rejection sampling. So if you have not, so if you might have heard this the term before, right? So it's one instance of a rejection sampling. So what you do now is the following. Okay, so let's look at this probability. Okay, so now for a fixed I, for a fixed independent set I, okay, let P of I be the probability that I is sampled. Correct. What you know is that the probability that I is sampled is at most this 1 plus this quantity, right? 1 plus epsilon by 1 minus epsilon to the n times 1 over omega g. Right? You know this is true, and this is if you look at um, very small epsilon, right? So suppose epsilon is really tiny. This is at most something like e power 3 epsilon n divided by cardinality omega g. Okay, so this is based on the fact that what we're going to do is we'll have this is again using the fact that 1 plus epsilon into 1 minus epsilon is at most 1 plus 3 epsilon. Okay. Assume that epsilon is very small. We'll see what the value is. So you know that the probability of I being sampled is at most so much. Okay. Now the idea of the algorithm is the following. Okay. So you run this sampling process, at the end of which you have an independent set I. Right. You do this. What you at the end of this process, you definitely have an independent set I. Furthermore, what you also know is that you can actually calculate this probability. Right. As you go along, you can actually calculate the probability that I is going to be sampled. Right. Because of the way in which we have written, it's basically n1, whatever is the n1, then it is n1 divided by n1 plus n2 and so on. It's just a you just need to multiply all of them together to get this value of pi. Okay. Now suppose you had once again, suppose you knew omega g, right? What you do at this step is the following, right? What you do is suppose you get I, okay, using your using the sampler, with probability 1 over pi cardinality omega g return I, and with probability 1 minus 1 over pi cardinality omega g return failure, or repeat. Go back here. Okay. So you know the suppose you know cardinality, you know p of pi that you can calculate as you're going along. Suppose for some reason you know omega g, then what you have is at the end of this process, you basically with probability 1 divided by pi cardinality omega g, you return I. Otherwise, you return a failure. You basically go and try to repeat this process again. What can you say about this new sampling process? What can you say about this sampling process? So what you can actually say is that, so let's say that you have something like a failure here. Instead of a repeat, say you have a failure. And if you have a failure, then say you repeat. Okay. Conditioned on not failure, what is the probability that the independent set I is returned? If I tell you that it was not a failure, what is the probability that I was returned? Or rather, let me just maybe not this thing. So what is the probability that I is returned after this process? So let's suppose you have this process. What is the probability that I was returned? So that, okay, if I was returned is basically this. Okay. See, the idea is that if you haven't if your algorithm has not failed, okay, then with probability pi you would have chosen I, and with probability 1 over pi omega g you would have returned that independent set as output, okay, which is basically something like 1 over omega g, right? Again, once again, we don't know how to compute omega g still, right? This would have happened, okay, just that we don't know how to compute omega g. So this quantity with which we should accept or reject, we don't know, right? What is the probability that this algorithm will return some independent set? So what is the probability that some independent set is returned? Right, it has a failure probability also. So what is the probability that some independent set is returned by this process? This process will either fail or return an independent set. What is the probability that it will return an independent set? Can you tell me?
Like I just want to confirm if I understand correctly. So you first like sample I, P of I also. So you first sample according to the previous number, and then with probability 1 by P of I omega g, you return the same I. Otherwise,
You return a failure. You just say that algorithm, I don't have anything to return. Say, you might have to repeat it again.
okay, right? If you keep repeating, you will always get an independent set, because
Yeah, if you return something, it'll always return. If at all it returns, it'll return an independent set. Yeah.
yeah. So with 1 by omega g, you get every independent set.
Uh, so in this case, if you fail, this is what happens. So you still have a very small um, probability of a failure, right? Because you have this. Sorry. Hello. Yeah. Okay. So yeah. So let me just say this. Okay. So what is the probability that? Okay. Let me just read it. What is the probability that probability of? Okay. Yeah, returning an independent set. Right. So the probability that this algorithm will succeed, right, which means that it will output an independent set, is independent. It will output an independent set I is something like 1 over um, pi omega g, right? So okay, no, yeah. Let me just try to reword it. Have I just made a mistake? Let me just go back. Yeah. Okay. So your failure probability is that you don't return any independent set, right? So what is the chance that you will return some independent set is a question, right? So the probability that you will return I is basically 1 over pi omega g, and summation over all I in omega g, right? This is the probability that you will return some independent set, right? This is the probability that the algorithm will not fail. And what you know is that pi we have bounded, right? Pi we know is at most what was pi? Pi we know is at most e to the 3 epsilon n divided by sorry, omega g, right? Okay, so this would mean that okay, let me just reword it. I think I've made some mistake. Let me just go back. Okay. Yeah. Okay, maybe I should not be doing this. So the probability that your algorithm succeeds is at least at least something like um, your failure probability is 1 minus pi divided by omega g. Your success probability is at least is basically the remaining, right? Your success probability that is for any I it is something like omega g, right? So this is at least e to the minus 3 epsilon n, right? So this is the probability which you will yeah, it will return I with probability pi eventually if repeated infinitely. Um yeah, yeah. Right. So what I want to say is that you can upper bound the failure probability of this algorithm. You don't want this algorithm to run infinitely often. You want this algorithm to stop after a polynomial number of steps. So how many times will you repeat it? Okay. So now if you choose epsilon to be something like 1 over n square or so, you can show that this probability is at least half. Okay, with some calculation. So what you can show is that if you choose epsilon to be 1 over n square, epsilon is your factor in your FP-RAS. Okay, this comes from our FP-RAS. If you choose again epsilon to be something like 1 over n square, then you will always return you will always with probability at least half you will return an independent set. Okay, the reason you want to do this is that you want to say that you don't have to repeat too many times to actually get hold of an independent set, right? Because there is a chance that when you will construct an independent set and there is some probability with which you will reject it, but you want to say that this rejection probability is not too high so that you don't have to repeat this too many times. Okay, so that is one thing. Secondly, the other fact is that we don't know this quantity, right? We don't know this, right? We only have an FP-RAS. We don't have this quantity omega, cardinality omega g. So what do? You again run your FP-RAS on this omega g, right? So what you do is your algorithm here, you're going to modify it slightly. Okay. So what you'll do is, let me just say the algorithm. So you will sample I. Okay. Then what you do is you compute a number n, which is obtained from the FP-RAS with G as the input, right? You do this, and then you say that you accept I with probability 1 divided by P of I times n into 1 plus eta. Okay, n is your approximation, so you do this and reject otherwise. Reject with probability 1 minus 1 over pi n into 1 plus epsilon. The reason is that you know that n lies between 1 plus epsilon omega g and 1 minus epsilon omega g, and therefore omega g you can say is at most n into 1 plus epsilon, right? So this is something, this is at most 1 over pi omega g. So your algorithm is basically going to do the following. It's going to sample I, then it will calculate pi, which it can do based on the values that the FP-RAS gives. And then it will accept with probability 1 divided by pi into n into 1 plus epsilon, that I, or it will say that there is a failure and then you have to repeat it. Okay. Is this algorithm clear? Now, if you notice, every I, suppose, so forget about the randomization in the algorithm for now. Suppose that your it's not actually an FP-RAS, that it is actually a deterministic approximation scheme, right? So now, what is the probability, right, of of the algorithm outputting a particular a fixed independent set I? What is that probability? What is the probability that this algorithm will output an independent, fix an independent set I? What is the probability that I will be output by this algorithm? Yeah, it's 1 over n times 1 plus epsilon, right? So this is the so fix an I, for a fixed I, probability that I is output is the probability that it was sampled, right, by your sampling process, and that the algorithm did not reject the sample, right, which is n into 1 divided by n into 1 plus epsilon, right? So every fixed independent set I is sampled, is returned with probability 1 over n into 1 plus epsilon, right? But there's also a probability that it will reject. So what you can say is that if the algorithm stops, right, if it has given, if the algorithm is has finished by outputting an independent set, then it's actually the distribution of the independent set is uniform over the set of all independent sets, right? Condition on the algorithm stopping, right, condition on the algorithm not returning a reject, the distribution over the independent set is actually uniform. Okay. So what you can say is that if you have stopped and given, then the distribution over the independent sets is actually the uniform distribution. The only thing is that you have a small error, okay, of not getting any of not getting an output. But then you can just repeat this multiple times, right? You know that the probability that you will return an independent set is at least half. So you just repeat this more than 2 times, say 4 or 5 times. Then with, or if you want the probability to be something like 1 minus delta, then you repeat it log 1 over delta times, so that in the end you will have an independent set. And once you have the independent set, you know that condition on the algorithm giving you an independent set, it's a uniform independent set. Okay. Is this clear? Is this part clear? Right. So condition on the algorithm not rejecting what you have is a uniformly random independent set. Okay. Now the only thing is that your algorithm. So this statement that I made assumes that all the counts of these NIs were correct, right? Because that's how I am computing this PI. To compute PI, I actually need to run the FPRAS, right? When I run the FPRAS and I get N1 and N2, and then I use this that to compute these probabilities PIs. So my acceptance or rejection probabilities can vary wildly if the FPRAS is not giving me the correct answer. Okay, assuming that I have a deterministic algorithm that is giving me the approximate value of the counts, then I can say that if it's n's, what you have is the uniform distribution. But just that we don't have exact counts of these values ni's. So what you want to say is that suppose that at every step of this algorithm, you had correct approximation. So suppose that at every step, the FPRAS gave you a good approximation. Okay. Conditioned on that, you can show that this distance, right? This what the sample that you get is actually close to the uniform distribution. I'm not going to do that calculation. It's just a little more of the calculations. We need to fix the parameters. So what you need to say is that you choose a delta, right? So what do you mean by what do I mean? So if you take a FPRAS, what you know is that the probability that your FPRAS on G, this value is between 1 plus epsilon cardinality omega G and 1 minus epsilon cardinality omega G, right? This, you know, this is at least 2/3 is what we have. This is what we mean by an FPRAS, right? But then you need to make sure that this happens for at every step, right? So you have how many times you have to do? You need to do this n times, right? At each step of your construction, when you are using the self reducibility, you need to keep computing these values, right? The ni's, and you need to make sure that you get good approximations at every step. So for that, you need to make sure that this error can be reduced to something like 1 minus delta, or this probability can be boosted up to something like 1 minus delta. Okay. So what you do is you need to make this FPRAS such that you can boost this probability to 1 minus delta. This can be done in log 1 over delta steps. Okay. So that at the end, the only time you will make a mistake, right? If you return an independent set, if you have this guarantee for at every step of your algorithm, then you can show that what you have is actually a um, uniform uniform sample. But just that you might have a small error. You will have an error of with an error at most delta, right? Uh, one of the FPRAS, one of the executions of A gave a bad approximation. Okay, which means that it gave a value aj which was either greater than 1 plus epsilon omega g, or it gave an aj which was less than 1 minus epsilon omega g. Okay. If this happens, then you are up, you cannot say anything you can't say anything about your approximation here, because the pi you have calculating is based on these values that the algorithm that FPRAS is giving you, right? So if there is a mistake in that FPRAS, then your pi itself can can be wrong, right? So your acceptance rejection probabilities can change, can be bad. So that is the only case where you actually can make a mistake. And what you're saying is that that probability is at most delta, and therefore you'll still be it'll give you a sampler where it'll be delta close to the uniform sample, and you need to execute it only log 1 over delta times, because that is the place where you need to uh, that's the number of times that you have to repeat the FPRAS to boost the success probability. Okay, so this part I'm not going into a lot of detail. I will probably give this as a small exercise of how you can actually improve this success probability to 1 minus delta by repeating log 1 over delta times, and the final part of this. It's not very difficult. I'll give you the set of steps so they can just fill it up. So that will probably come in your next problem set. Okay. Um, okay. So any questions? As a small as a small exercise towards that, right? How do you think how will you get the error from 2 by 3 error probability down from 1 by 3 to something like a delta for such a for an FPRS? How will you do that? What do you think is the way? So suppose you have a FPRS where the success probability is 2/3. I want the success probability to be 1 minus delta. What do I do? Repeat, and then what do you do? You repeat it so many times, but then what do you do after the answers? You get a bunch of answers. What do? You get a bunch of numbers. Average. Okay, so think about it. Average will not work, right? So can you think about why the average is not a good thing here? What happens if you run this multiple times and take the average? What is that? Is that a good estimate, or why is it not a good estimate? Okay, maybe you can think about it. Why average is not a good estimate? Um, and if not average, what else will you do here? Right? You do have to repeat it, but after repeating and getting these bunch of values, what do you do with these values is something that you can think about. Okay. Any questions? Any other questions? We can have bad approximation on both sides. Yeah. So the thing is that is true. If you have bad approximations on both sides, then your average will be good. But then what if you have bad approximation on one side, right? You can have a really bad approximation on one run, or maybe all them almost every run runs properly, but then there is this one bad approximation that is just skewing the average completely, right? Because you have no guarantee. If the approximation is bad, you have no guarantee how bad that can be. Can be really really bad with a fairly large probability. When we say all runs are good, do they give the same value? No, they don't. You don't need the same value, right? You just need to say that it lies within that range, because that's the only thing that we need. We use an approximation. The way finally we solved it was that we have this approximation for PIs, right? So as long as that is true, then the number of repetitions and everything will be fine, right? With probability at least half, you will still accept and everything. Yeah. Yeah. So average is not good mainly because you can have one bad output, right? For instance, what this this FP as the statement is telling you is that with probability at most one third, it can be either greater than 1 plus epsilon omega g or less than 1 minus epsilon omega g, right? Maybe with probability one third, you have a value which is say 200 times omega g. Maybe that is actually happening, right? Its probability is just one third. That happening is just one third. But in that case, the value is going to something like 200 times omega g, right? In which case, if you take an average, the average will get skewed very towards that 200, right? So average, that's why average is not a good thing to do, because you don't know when you go into that bad event, you don't know with what probability you will get which value, right? So average is not good. The question is what will work, right?
I mean, so you know that the expected number of uh, values that will be in the correct range is
Huh.
2 by 3. So,
Yeah.
like suppose you fix some value of omega g, and then you find out the fraction of samples that gave you within this 1 plus epsilon and 1 minus epsilon, and then
But
you
you don't
choose
know omega g, no?
omega g such that the fraction is 2 by 3 or close to 2 by 3.
No, no, you can't choose omega g, right? That's given to you. That's fixed. That's outside your control.
No, epsilon is the parameter we are choosing, right?
Yeah, but g is your graph, input graph, and
Right,
omega
right,
g is a set of independent sets of that, or whatever is that independent sets of that graph.
right. So omega g can be anything. So I find for log of 1 by delta terms, I have some values.
Huh.
I know that approximately 2/3 of these values are concentrated around like omega g. So I find that value x around which like more than 2/3 of my input are.
But
Uh,
you don't know what, right? I mean, you don't know what that value you're searching for. You'll have a bunch of values.
for example, if it is half, then instead of 2 by 3, if it is half, then I take the median.
So why? That's what Raghu is written, right? Why? What if you take median even when it is 2 by 3? If you have at least 2/3 of the values as good values, then the median also will be a good value, no?
Oh, right. So I was just okay.
Right. So
Like
so that's
okay,
what Raghu has said. So you just need to take the median, right, instead of the
okay,
average,
okay, okay.
and you can analyze it. Yeah. So which is why the log 1 over delta is coming, and then you can use that for your samples. Yeah. Any questions? Okay. So this shows this shows the connection between sampling and um, approximation. So now let's see how we need to. So the idea of Markov chain Monte Carlo, right? So the idea of what is known as Markov chain Monte Carlo. is to construct um, a Markov chain whose stationary distribution is the, say, the uniform distribution over the set that you want, right? Not always the uniform distribution. Sometimes it might be a different distribution. But then a way to sample from a set. So you don't know how to directly sample. So in the case of independent set, you don't know how to not known how to sample directly from the set of independent sets. So the thing is, to how do you actually uh, get a sample, right? So what you want to do is you construct a Markov chain whose stationary distribution is the uniform distribution, right? And finally prove that the Markov chain converges quickly. Okay, so we'll see this part right now. We'll see some examples of how to construct this. And then this is the final part of the course where we will look at methods to prove that a Markov chain converges quickly to its stationary distribution, right? So let's see. Let's for instance, let's look at an example. Let's look at the independent set again. Okay? Let's see how to construct, say, a Markov chain which has whose stationary distribution is uniform, right? It'll not necessarily converge quickly, but at least let's see how we can go about doing this. Okay. So first, right. So what you have is that you have some space omega, right? This is your the set of states, right? Your state space, and you want to design a Markov chain which is whose stationary distribution is going to be uniform. Okay. So the idea is basically the following statement. So, from it, you get the construction based on the following. Okay. So notice that if you have a finite Markov chain, you can construct the graph, right? The directed graph corresponding to that Markov chain. And what you know is that the stationary distribution is for every vertex, the stationary distribution, the weight for every vertex is proportional to its degree in that graph, right? That's what we have seen. If you take a Markov chain and you look at, for instance, we saw that the Markov chain can be, the evolution of a Markov chain can be thought of as a random walk on the corresponding graph. And the stationary distribution for a vertex V, which is an element in omega, is the is degree divided by the number of edges. So somehow it's the value is proportional to the degree. Whereas what we want is a distribution that is completely uniform. Okay, we want it to be uniform across every for every vertex, right? And the way this is done is to say that, um, so for instance, if you have small so if you have a vertex with small degree, then you have there is a chance that it will the stationary distribution the reaching there is smaller, much smaller than some other vertices, right? So what do you think can be done? What is the most natural thing to do? How do you balance this out, right? The fact that there are some low degree vertices and high degree vertices and so on. How do you balance it out? What is one way in which you can balance this asymmetry? right? You have to increase the degree of this Markov chain. So what do you think? What should you do? Yeah. So yeah. So that's something that we have seen, right? Just put self loops. Put lots of self loops so that a vertex has gets a high degree, right? And that is what we are going to see. We can just see. That's what we are going to see next, right? So let omega be a finite state space. Okay. And you have, so you can say that every vertex has some neighborhood, right? So for every v in omega, there is some neighborhood n of v, right? And this is the degree, right, of that corresponding vertex in the graph, right? So let n be the maximum of n of v in omega, right? And let m be a number greater than n. Okay. Now consider a Markov chain, right, where PUV is 1 over m if u is not equal to v and v is in the neighborhood of u, right? It is 0 if u is not equal to v and v is not a neighbor, right? And with the remaining probability, it is it stays in that, right? So if u is equal to v, so there is um, n of u divided by m if u is equal to v, right? So what it's doing is the following, right? So you have the states, right? So you have u, right? It has some neighbors. It has just two neighbors. What it says is I'll go with probability 1 over m to both of these, and with the remaining things I'll stay here, right? So this is a edge with you stay here with this probability, right? So you could think of it as saying that you are adding these additional m minus, this is equivalent to saying you're adding m minus n of u self loops, right? That's what you're doing, right? So you take this graph and you put so many self loops, right? So in some sense, so what is happening now, right? So what you have done is that this graph has become, so now this is a m regular digraph, right? So you've basically made the graph into a regular graph. Okay. So you had some say state spaces, and you just make the graph regular by just putting enough self loops so that you can um, uh, so that the state distribution is now uniform, right? Right. This is all you need to do. If you have a Markov chain, you just need to make sure that your the corresponding digraph is regular, and what you have is a you'll know that the stationary distribution is uniform, right? So in our case, for the independent set, let's see how what a let's look at a simple Markov chain for the independent set, right? So this is a Markov chain for the independent set, right? So you start. So suppose the idea is that, so let x0 be an arbitrary independent set, So you're going to define what are its transitions, right? That's what you need to do. You need to define this Markov chain. You want to say that given an arbitrary independent set, how where you should move. Okay, and the way it's going to be defined is by looking at whether which vertex can we add a vertex. So there'll be an edge between two independent sets if they differ by an edge, differ by a vertex. Okay, so what you do is the following. So to compute xi plus 1, okay, we'll say how to compute xi plus 1 from xi. Okay, so what you do is you choose v uniformly at random from the vertex set. This is the vertex set of the graph, okay, not of the Markov chain. This is vertex set of G, not the vertex set of the Markov chain. Okay, because G is what you have, right? The graph is what you have. You're defining this Markov chain on top of it, right? So now if V is in Xi, okay, then what you do is you remove V. Okay, if V is not in Xi, okay, and if adding V to Xi gives an independent set, then you set Xi plus 1 to be Xi union V. Okay, else you set Xi plus 1 is equal to Xi. Correct? So now for this Markov chain, so is this definition clear? Yeah. What can you say about the degree of this? So you take this Markov chain, look at its corresponding digraph. What is its degree?
N, right?
Yeah. So the degree is degree of the digraph of the Markov chain is n, which is the size of the vertex set of G. Okay. The Markov chain, the graph corresponding to the Markov chain can be huge, right? Because every subset of vertices could be potentially an independent set, right? But its degree is n, which is the number of vertices of G, right? So this is a digraph. It's a regular graph, right? And so now to have a stationary distribution, what other conditions do you need? You need irreducibility and you need aperiodicity, right? Is this irreducible? Is this Markov chain irreducible? Why is this Markov chain irreducible? Why? What is the reason? Any? Can you just briefly explain? Okay, you can choose appropriate series of vertices. In particular, the empty set is an independent set, and you can, given any two independent sets, you have a way to go from that independent set to the empty set, empty independent set, and from the empty independent set to the new independent set I. Right. So if you have say I1 and I2, right, you can go from I1 to the empty independent set, and then from the empty independent set to I2. right? So there is always a path. Given any two independent sets, I have a path from the one independent set to the other, from I1 to I2. I go to the empty set and then from empty set to I2, right? So it is definitely reducible because it's strongly connected, right? And what about aperiodicity? Is it aperiodic? Why is it aperiodic? Yeah, it has self loop, right? At least if you have an edge, then you have a self loops, right? If you have, because of the xi plus 1 equal to xi, there are self loops in this graph, right? So this Markov chain is irreducible, aperiodic, and you know that the corresponding digraph is regular with degree n. Therefore, it must have a stationary distribution, and the stationary distribution must be the uniform distribution over the independent sets, right? So if you want to sample an independent set, all you have to do is to start with an arbitrary independent set and do a random walk, right? If you do a sufficiently long random walk by following this process, what you have at the end is basically a uniformly random independent set. The only question is whether how long you should do the random walk. Okay. So this apparently this Markov chain, it's not we don't know how to prove that this converges quickly to a uniform distribution. But we'll see another Markov chain later on, right? Where we'll use it to actually construct an FPRAS for counting independent sets, right? But so we'll stop here for now. So this is just about how we will try to design Markov chains which will be useful for us. So you need to design such a Markov chain and then try to prove its convergence properties. Okay? Now, another related question is, in some cases, it's not enough to just have the uniform distribution as the stationary distribution. It is possible that when we are trying to design the algorithm, we will need a distribution that is some other distribution. It is some fixed distribution, but not the uniform distribution. Now it's possible to convert any to given a Markov chain. It's always possible to convert this Markov chain so that its stationary distribution is that fixed given distribution. Okay, and this conversion is what is known as the Metropolis algorithm. Okay, so we'll briefly see this in the next lecture, and then from there we will see a way to prove that Markov chains, given a Markov chain, how do you prove that it converges to the stationary distribution quickly? That's what we will do in the remaining lectures. Okay, any questions so far?